When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube and welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about why did Benjen join the wall. I have a couple reasons that we're going to get into in this video, but before we do, if you'd like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow and make sure people like this content as well. And let's get into the video. So on the face value of it, if we look at why Benjen might have wanted to go to the wall, let's look at it. For one, the Starks, as well as kind of the first men, looked at the wall a lot differently than the rest of the kingdoms did. For instance, people like that lived in like King's Landing or in the South would have viewed the wall as kind of like this type of exile thing where you're not dying, but it's just right above that line. For people like the Starks, this was kind of a noble thing. It could bring honor to your house and was not looked at as something like you're a criminal type thing, right? Now, if we also look at it from the point of view that Benjen was the third son, and he didn't really have much value politically and stuff like that, on the face value of it, it makes sense why Benjen would go to the wall. There's not going to be a lot of questions brought up. It's just kind of a Stark thing. It's something the Starks would do. But if we take a little bit further and look at how quickly Benjen actually goes to the wall. Now, we are told that Benjen departs for the wall only a few days after Ned returns from Robert's Rebellion and the whole war. Because the entire time the war is going on, Benjen is the one in Winterfell. He's the person that has to be the Stark there because his father goes south, dies, his older brother dies, Ned's off doing, war, and then Lyanna is at the Tower of Joy, presumably. So Benjen sits out this entire war. Now, there are some things for me to where I believe Benjen was involved in Lyanna and Rhaegar's kind of romance. And I think if we look at the events that happened, if we look at the tourney of Harrenhal and the Night of the Laughing Tree, I have made a video talking more detailed on what happened there. But for this video, I'm just going to talk about what I think happened with Benjen and how he was involved. Now, we know that Benjen was there and helped Howland get into the feast. And we also know that Benjen kind of noticed that Lyanna had kind of this little crush on Rhaegar. She had seen him, Lyanna had seen Rhaegar kind of singing and heard his singing, and that was something all the women liked about Rhaegar. And you could tell there was some kind of affection for Rhaegar from Lyanna without them even meeting. And when we talk about Howland, right, he had been, kind of mistreated by these three other, people that were going to be in the tournament. Lyanna wanted to get kind of justice for Howland being, their bannerman and all of that. But Lyanna was a woman. They didn't have armor. They didn't have a horse. But Benjen, we know, says that he could get them armor and a horse, and this armor could fit someone like Lyanna. Now, this is what I end up believe happened. I believe all this ended up happening, and Lyanna was the person that was in this little tournament, and really what she was trying to accomplish was she's trying to get justice on these three people that had been, doing wrong with Howland, and then she would get out, right? It was something where it's like Benjen and Lyanna were just kind of doing this as like a little adventure type thing. And we see how that makes sense. This shouldn't have been a big deal. You would just fight 3 nights and then leave and then you're good, right? And it kind of gets out of control, as we'll talk about in a second. But before we get into that, I also want to talk about how Benjen and Lyanna, we know that they were at least pretty close. Because Benjen and Lyanna were the 2 Stark children that were really always at Winterfell. We know that Ned and Brandon were off other places. They had been fostered. And we get visions from Bran that Benjen and Lyanna, were play sword fighting and all that stuff. And we know it's probably Lyanna because of the girl is described as being kind of like Arya. And we know that Arya and the Arya and Lyanna comparison is out there a ton. We hear it a ton through the books. Something that I do think is interesting about that comparison, by the way, just a side note while we're in this video, Arya is always described as looking like a boy and kind of ugly, but then Lyanna is always described as being beautiful and pretty. So I just think that's a very weird thing. But yeah, not talking about that in this video. But getting back to the Night of the Laughing Tree and the Tourney of Harrenhal, so this all happens. Lyanna, takes these people out. She leaves. Now the plan was, they would return all this stuff that Benjen got, and they would leave the shield or whatever, and kind of just, as a cool game almost, right? The Mad King was not about this, and he wanted to figure out who these people were, right? Or who the Knight of the Laughing Tree was. And there was tons of people that were trying to look for them or whatever and figure out who this was, but Rhaegar is the chief one among them. And what I believe ended up happening is that Rhaegar ends up finding Benjen, because here's the thing. The shield, you would have been able to figure out who made the shield. They could have probably told you who ordered it. And you just go back and forth until you figure out, okay, well, if you look at the horse that she was riding, you could figure out who eventually got all this stuff. This would have then led into Benjen. I think Rhaegar would have met Benjen, and then from there, Rhaegar would have met Lyanna through Benjen. And we already know Lyanna had some attraction to him, and I think this is where their relationship started, right? And I think this is why Lyanna is crowned for her beauty at the end of the tournament, because I think Rhaegar and Lyanna had already met. It makes way more sense to me on why that whole interaction would happen if they'd already met. And you kind of start to see where this is going, because if this is the truth, we don't know, because George R. R. Martin has not given us a lot of clarification on what happened in Robert's Rebellion, probably because, again, spoilers for the end of the books. But if they had met, you think about it like this from Benjen's perspective. He is the reason that Robert's Rebellion almost starts. Because then we know when Benjen goes back to Winterfell and he has to stay there and his father comes south and all that stuff, we know that Lyanna and Rhaegar kind of disappear, whether that was for love, whether that was he kidnapped her, whatever. The whole time, Benjen kind of would probably know that they were attracted to each other or liked each other to some degree. He'd already seen it based upon my theory that I'm doing. So with this being said, and whether or not Lyanna ever contacts Benjen this whole time is thinking, what have I done? I have let these two people interact, and then the worst part of it all is he doesn't tell anyone. So if you look at the thousands of people that end up dying in the war, could Benjen have saved them? Right? Could this have been changed differently? Because if I'm Benjen, that's how I would be thinking. I would be extremely guilty and feel just terrible about myself because of thinking how the country is burning right now and what I did and how I was complicit in all of this happening. And when you look at how this ends up changing, right? How Ned comes back after the war, and really think about who's left in the Stark line, right? This is a very bad time for them because you have Benjen, Ned, Catelyn, the bastard, which Ned is saying is his bastard, and then Robb, who's just been born, more or less. So when you look at it from that point of view, it also doesn't make sense from a point of Benjen leaving right away when really the Stark line is not secure. Infants die all the time in this world. So him leaving just like that is very dangerous to the Stark bloodline, which adds to my whole thing of either way, I think there was a conversation when Ned returned, and I think Ned and Benjen kind of talked about everything that happened and put everything together on what actually happened. Now, I would tend to believe Ned did not force Benjen to go to the wall. He might have been angry, but I don't think that was what they came to. I think Benjen at this point, he had a lot of years to kind of figure out what he wanted to do. I think Benjen wanted to go to the wall, right? If we look at how, if anyone ever came asking questions about Benjen's involvement or anything like that, Benjen's at the wall, and it makes perfect sense why he'd be there. Like I talked about at the beginning of this video. And also, not only does Benjen do that, but also I think when you think about Jon, right? And this, again, will be completely different if you think this is Ned and Ashara. So I'm going to go off of what I believe, and I think it's Lyanna and Rhaegar. If you think differently, this part would change for you. But I believe that because you don't know what Jon is going to be when he grows up, you don't know if he's going to take the Targaryen features, I believe the plan was always for Jon to eventually go to the Wall. Because A, he would be safe there. It didn't matter who his parents were, anything. Robert wouldn't touch him. He had already made this agreement with Aemon. He didn't go after Aemon because he was a Night's Watchman. That, to me, would be why Benjen would also go there, so that he could kind of get a position there and then kind of mentor Jon when he came to that age and Jon goes to the Wall. So that is kind of what I believe ended up happening with Jon, or not Jon, Benjen. And I think it was more of a guilt thing, and it was something that it was almost recompense, where it was like, this is an honorable thing to do, and also you avoid all these questions that possibly could be asked and all of that. It just makes sense on how quickly Benjen goes to the Wall. But that is my theory for why Benjen ends up at the Wall, why he decided to go there. Let me know if you guys have anything else you would like to add on to this theory, if you think I'm wrong, if there's something else that you guys think could have happened there, and all that. So thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.